Undercover boss orders breakfast inside a busy diner, freezes as waitress says she was told to smile or get fired. The spoon clinked softly against the porcelain coffee cup. A fragile sound, yet it rang clearly in that moment, as if the entire calf was holding its breath without realizing it. New Dawn Calf Branch, number 18 on Willow Street, long known for its classic decor and staff as cheerful as morning sunlight. But today, something in the air made even the golden lights feel cold. Michael Foster, 50 years old, founder of the New Dawn Calf chain, was seated near the kitchen, dressed simply in a pale gray shirt, khaki pants, and round glasses. He was making one of his unannounced visits, no entourage, no warning, just himself blending in as a regular customer, grabbing breakfast. Once again, he did this to see if the spirit he once poured into the brand still lived in its walls. He had just taken his second sip of coffee when he heard it. A faint voice nearly drowned by the sound of grinding beans from the barista station. "I have to smile." Or the manager says, "I'll lose my shift." Michael looked up. A waitress had just passed by carrying a tray of toast and scrambled eggs. Her mouth still wore the light smile of friendly service, but her eyes, they slipped past the room, vacant like someone performing a role she no longer believed in. He set down his coffee, his fingers clenched slightly. Among hundreds of locations, what was happening here when staff had to choose between smiling and keeping their hours? Another waitress leaned in, whispering to the first, "You're lucky you didn't get fired last week," a girl cried during her shift, lost the whole month's schedule. Michael didn't turn, but he heard every word. He had once told his entire organization New Dawn should never be a place where people must brace just to survive. It must be where people treat each other with kindness and are treated kindly in return. So what had cracked the calf around him remained quiet, but it was a false calm. Customers still chatted softly. The espresso machine still hissed in rhythm. Plates still arrived hot and on time. But beneath that polished exterior, something was broken. Michael opened his small notebook, the first page blank. But he knew this morning it wouldn't stay that way. A nearby regular munching on toast mumbled to a friend that new girl's always smiling. "But I swear she's shaking, probably scared." Michael tilted his head slightly, eyes drifting toward the back corner where the young woman was wiping down tables. Her back slightly hunched. Movements quick and mechanical, lacking natural ease. Each time the manager walked by, she flashed a forced, rehearsed smile, not friendliness. A mask. Who was enforcing these invisible rules? What was happening behind the facade of warmth? And how many people across his system were forced to choose between a fake smile and unemployment? Michael whispered to a young male server nearby who was pouring water. "This place seems stressful." The boy looked at him, about to respond, then only gave a tight smile, nodded, and walked away. No words. No eye contact. Michael sat still. In over 2 decades in the F&B industry, he knew silence wasn't random. Silence was a sign of fear. Sunrise Calf, the corner location on Ashland Avenue, a spot locals fondly called morning and a bowl of oatmeal. Located right at the main intersection, it had a small but warm storefront, pinewood walls, large windows catching the early sunlight filtering through maple trees outside. Round tables near the glass, white cloth napkins, porcelain coffee pots, always full. Every morning looked the same: familiar faces, familiar menu, familiar smiles. But today, something wasn't whole. Michael Foster, 50 years old, founder of Sunrise Calf, had returned in disguise to one of the chain's earliest branches. He wore a faded blue shirt under a worn khaki jacket and a baseball cap. Sitting alone in the far corner, he had a clear view of the entire room, the dining area, the service counter, even the small surveillance camera perched on the ceiling. His hand rested lightly on the old leather-bound notebook, the one where he had once jotted down his earliest notes on the culture of kind service. And now he was writing something entirely different. Nina, around 24 years old, walked past Michael's table with freshly brewed coffee. Hair tied, neatly apron in place, swift steps. But Michael noticed every time she turned away, her shoulders drooped slightly. Her smile, the one she had just offered, disappeared from her lips. Her eyes, when she thought no one was looking, revealed exhaustion. Not the tiredness of a busy morning, but the kind that accumulates day after day and is forced beneath the surface by a mechanical smile. Then, In a fleeting moment, when she thought no one could see, Nina glanced up directly at the security camera on the ceiling, as if checking whether she was being recorded. Michael leaned slightly instinctively. That small gesture told him this wasn't accidental. Sandra, the shift manager, stepped out from the kitchen, clipboard in hand, high heels clicking on the tiled floor. Around 40 years old, straight brown hair, sharply contoured makeup, her voice rang with the sharp sweetness of someone who's worked in service too long to still be sincere. "Hello there, anything special for you today?" she asked the next table, voice dripping like honey. But seconds after turning around, that smile vanished like it had never existed. Sandra walked toward the register where Nina was wiping down the POS machine and said, just loud enough for Michael to hear, "Smile, Nina. The guests haven't seen enough sunshine yet." Nina bit her lip, nodded, and forced another strained smile. An elderly man at the table next to Michael, wearing an old knit sweater, hands trembling with age, leaned closer and muttered almost to himself, "I saw her yesterday smiling till her cheeks hurt." But the manager still said, "Not bright enough." Strange world, the coffee's bitter, but they want the staff to act like stage lights. Michael turned to him, nodded slightly. He didn't ask anything further, but all his senses were now fully alert. From the moment he entered the caf, people would have seen just another breakfast spot. But now the masks were beginning to slip. The waitress smiled, but only when watched. The shift manager always hovered behind staff, with eyes like surveillance. The security camera was placed dead center above the counter, not in a standard corner. And more importantly, a smile, once a sign of warmth, was now a tool of control. At the payment counter, a new hire muttered when he didn't see his name on the weekly schedule, "Probably, 'cause I forgot to greet a guest at the door yesterday, he didn't speak loudly." No resentment in his tone, just a resignation that had settled in deep. But for Michael, it was a lightning bolt through everything he had once defined as kindness. He scribbled a line in his notebook: "A smile should never be a condition for survival." He inhaled deeply, his eyes scanning every expression in the crowded room where warmth was scarce despite the number of guests. Michael stepped outside, intending to take a routine call from headquarters, just a scheduled meeting, nothing unusual. But as his hand touched the phone, he heard a sentence soft enough to sound like an accident, but heavy enough to stop him mid-step. It was Nina's voice. Gentle, hoarse, like a sigh she had held in all morning. "I only got called out yesterday because I didn't smile the right way, not because I did anything wrong." Michael paused by the glass door, pretending to read the menu pasted outside. But he heard the next line clearly from a younger male server, whispering voice, "Bitter Sandra calls us negative faces. Says we need to fix our expressions if we want to stay." Michael turned slowly back inside. No need to order anything more. No need to rush. He sat again, watching. Up front, customers still chatted, ordered more eggs and black coffee. But behind every staff smile was a quiet strain stretched thin. At the bar counter, a barista stacked cups, her face neutral, but her voice as soft as the coffee grinder replied to a coworker. "Even tips left directly by guests get pooled in. Sandra says, if you're not okay with it, then quit." Michael leaned slightly. The pages in his leather-bound notebook were filling up again, but this time not with notes about menu tweaks or customer experience. This time, they were about protecting people being forced to live like actors in a staged play where smiles were set by quotas. In the back corner near the entrance to the prep kitchen, a female employee, around 30, hands still wet, was drying freshly rinsed glasses. She didn't know Michael was watching. A colleague asked gently,
"You doing okay?"
She smiled weakly. "We're not robots, you know, but here those who smile right survive. Smile wrong and you're out." And then, as if she couldn't believe her own words, she started crying, still wiping her hands. Tears mixed with dishwater, but the emotion couldn't be rinsed away. Michael noticed the shift schedule pinned beside the counter. Below each name was a strange symbol. He asked a young server nearby, "What do those mean?" The girl hesitated. "Oh, it's just to track emotional state, sir. Sandra says if someone gets 2 cloudy face days in a row, they lose shifts because it affects the caf's energy." Michael said nothing. He simply bent down and wrote in his notebook, "People aren't born to be measured by their facial expressions. A regular customer walked out of the caf trying to hand Nina a tip directly. Sandra immediately approached, gentle but firm. "You'll put that in the front tip tray, won't you, Nina?" Nina said nothing. She bowed slightly, took the bill, and dropped it into the communal tray. Michael tightened his grip on the notebook. He didn't need any more evidence. This wasn't a temporary misunderstanding. It was a microcontrol system powered by fear and expression management, where workers weren't allowed to be tired, weren't allowed to feel sad, weren't allowed to be human. Michael ordered another cappuccino. When Nina brought it, "He asked you holding up okay these days." She smiled, perfectly rehearsed. "I'm fine, sir. Just wish I had one day off where I didn't have to smile." She turned and walked away. She didn't know that single sentence had just escalated Michael's quiet investigation to an entirely new level. Michael sat alone. Morning light stretched across the table. On a plain white napkin, he wrote one final line: "I created sunrise to bring light. But if that light becomes pressure, I must be the first to dim it." He folded the notebook, stood up, and for the first time there was no calm in his eyes. Michael didn't interrogate. He didn't issue orders. He wasn't a detective walking into a caf, but a middle-aged man with round glasses, notebook in hand, simply curious about the life behind the morning coffee counter. He began with simple questions, part warmth, part concern, and a great deal of quiet observation. "Are wages okay here?" A young server hesitated, eyes avoiding direct contact. "Well, if you follow instructions and smile the right way," Sir Michael nodded lightly. Didn't write anything just yet. He left a blank space on the page as if the answer was still unfolding. A young woman wiping the counter, about 20, brown-dyed hair, wearing Bluetooth earbuds just to mute the noise. When Michael asked how work was going, she spoke quietly, almost like a confession everyone here already knows. "It's just that no one dares say anything."
Smile too little, your hours get cut.
"Smile the wrong way, you get pulled aside." She wiped another round around the pastry tray, then added in a whisper only Michael could hear, "They cut 3 of my shifts just because I asked why my tips were short." Michael walked to the drink station where a barista was punching in a milk tea order. "Busy?" He asked, holding a paper cup. "Yeah, but we're not allowed to complain. Every shift feels like a rehearsal." Michael gave a soft chuckle. "Rehearsal? Yeah, Sandra calls us the image crew. If a customer's happy, it's because we smiled right. If they're not, it's because our face was wrong." On the wall next to the clock and machine, there was a happy meter chart classifying staff into 3 levels: sunshine, cloudy, stormy. Michael pretended to admire it like a curious customer, but his eyes didn't leave the small print below: stormy, 2 days in a row equals scheduled to be reviewed. He flipped open his notebook, wrote a single line: "Emotion is data. Here, it's weaponized." Nina was the last person he approached. She was arranging chocolate muffins in the display case. Each pastry set perfectly in place as if she were trying to hold on to some kind of order amid the chaos within. Michael stepped closer, voice still calm and gentle. "These look delicious." "You made them," Nina nodded, smiled faintly, but kept her eyes on the tray. "How long have you been here?" "Almost a year now. But I'm thinking of leaving." "Why's that?" Michael asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "I got 2 days pay docked once, just for complaining to the shift lead. Sandra said anyone who brings down the energy doesn't belong here." Nina paused, looked at him for the first time as if seeing someone who might actually listen. "I think I'm probably the kind of customer they don't want to serve. Only difference is I wear the uniform." Michael said nothing. He simply opened his notebook, rested a hand on the page, wrote something, then crossed it out. End of shift. Nina was called into the back kitchen where there were no cameras. No customers. Just Sandra and a walkie-talkie. Michael deliberately stood near the POS terminal by the front entrance, close enough to overhear snippets echoing from the walkie left open. Sandra's voice, cold and clipped: "If she starts giving excuses again, we'll cut her weekends completely." Then the door opened. Nina stepped out, eyes red. No one asked. No one spoke. She quietly returned to polishing the glass case. her smile gone, lips tight, eyes not on customers but gazing past tables and chairs, avoiding everyone's gaze. Michael returned to his seat. Didn't eat any more. He opened his notebook, wrote a short entry, this time in bold: a server should not be punished for having real emotions. And a cafe must not be a place where feelings are rented. As customers began to leave, Sandra walked into the main lounge. She smiled brightly, bowed to each guest. But when she passed Michael, she stopped. New here, if you don't mind me asking, do you think our staff seems cheerful enough? Michael looked straight ahead. His gaze had changed. I think I'll have a few questions for you, but not right now. Sandra raised an eyebrow, unaware that a silent undercurrent was already beginning to flow beneath her feet. On the cloth napkin, Michael placed his pen, then slowly turned it, lining it up with the Sunrise logo. The sunlight outside was still warm, but something inside him had just turned cold. Michael Foster set down his cup of coffee. He stood up. No sound of chairs scraping. No sudden movement. Just a man seemingly walking toward the counter to ask a simple question. But his eyes had shifted from calm to piercing. He stopped at the counter where Sandra, the shift manager, was adjusting her uniform ribbon, still wearing that faint smile she always did. "Excuse me," Michael said gently. "May I ask about the smile policy here?" Sandra froze for a beat. "Just one." "Oh, it's just a guideline," she replied for positive energy. You know, customers like it. Michael said nothing more. He gave a slight nod, but his eyes were no longer those of a curious customer. Just as Michael turned to walk away, a busser who had previously avoided conversation suddenly stepped forward and whispered softly, "Sir, I didn't dare say anything earlier, but Miss Nina, she got marked as stormy face 3 days in a row." Michael tilted his head, surprised. "Marked, yes, Sandra's private notebook. She tracks our facial expressions. If you get tagged as negative face 3 times, you lose your weekend shift." Michael tightened his grip on his notebook. He didn't return to his table. Instead, he turned toward the back of the cafe where the time card machine was located. Beside it was a clipboard. On it, a shift schedule list marked with small red symbols, cloudy face attitude, warning no smile observed. Michael silently took a photo of the schedule. Not as evidence, but to remember that the very system he built had been warped into this. On his way back to the front, Michael passed by the dishwashing station.
A young female staff member was crying quietly, wiping her hands with a crumpled napkin.
"I'm sorry, I'm just tired today. I couldn't force a smile." Michael didn't say a word. He simply placed a fresh napkin beside her, then walked away. At the counter, Sandra was chatting with a regular, still cheerful, laughing, loudly waving her hand at Sunrise Cafe. "We always radiate positive energy." Michael stepped up. This time, he didn't hold back. "I think it's time we talk more specifically about this energy policy you mentioned." Sandra turned toward him, momentarily surprised, but still maintaining her controlled demeanor. "Yes, sir. Do you have feedback for us?" Michael responded slowly, each word deliberate and clear. "I'd like to know, do you require staff to score their facial expressions daily?" Sandra blinked. "Oh, it's not a requirement, just an internal system to monitor performance, Michael repeated. "Yes, says. I mean, those who smile consistently with good attitude get scheduled more easily. Anyone negative is told they need time to rest." A nearby staff member accidentally dropped a tray. The entire cafe went still. Michael turned back. He didn't raise his voice, but his tone now carried weight. "And what about the tips? Is it true they all have to be handed over to you?" Sandra began to deflect. "Not exactly handed over. It's just pooled together for equal distribution." Michael stepped forward slightly, as if pressing down the air itself, and distributed according to emotional criteria. A customer nearby whispered, "Who is this man?" Sandra started to fumble. She turned away, pretending to take an order. Michael opened his notebook. He pulled out a black card stamped with a silver Sunrise Cafe logo. He placed it gently on the counter. "I'm Michael Foster, founder of the Sunrise Cafe chain." Silence. A single drop of coffee fell from a paper cup onto the floor. The woman at the dish sink looked up in shock. A staff member in the corner dropped a dish towel. Everyone watching held their breath. Not because of a plot twist, but because they were witnessing justice stir right where injustice had quietly taken root. Michael no longer looked at Sandra. He spoke clearly loud enough for every employee to hear. I designed Sunrise to be a warm place. Not a stage. Not a smile training boot camp. I want to know, why did a girl nearly lose her job simply because she didn't smile behind him? Nina stood frozen, but for the first time she raised her head. Would Sandra deny it again? What would Michael do next? Was there proof strong enough? Michael Foster slowly removed his glasses. A small gesture, but it made the entire Sunrise calf pause.
Sandra blinked.
Her expression shifted in an instant from assertive to defensive. Michael looked her straight in the eye. No longer a curious guest, but a man who controlled the entire board. "I'm Michael Foster," he said, voice low but clear, founder of Sunrise Calf. A metal spoon hit the tiled floor.
Sandra took a step back as if unable to believe what she just heard.
A nearby staff member whispered, "That's him." Nina stood frozen. She clenched the order slip in her hand so tightly it crumpled, then let it fall to the floor. Michael opened his notebook. He turned to a flagged page. He read aloud slowly, each line landing like a stone. Internal policy number 14 of Sunrise Calf. No one is allowed to adjust shifts, cut hours, or threaten termination based on facial expressions if the employee is meeting standard job expectations. Everyone working here, whether serving tables or washing dishes, deserves equal respect. No one was born to play the clown.
Sandra pressed her lips together, wanting to speak, but her voice caught.
Michael raised his hand. From the back entrance, a man entered, the regional supervisor. In his hand, a tablet device. He raised the device and tapped the screen gently. "We've extracted this from the internal camera system," Michael stated clearly, to verify reports from the staff. The calf held its breath. On screen appeared the scene, a morning from 3 days ago. Sandra stood close to Nina in front of the staff restroom mirror. "No, that smile lacks soul." Again. Nina tried to smile. "Still fake." "The smile has to feel warm. Understand your face when the customer came in looked like you were being punished." The girl lowered her head. Sandra continued, "If there's no improvement this week, you won't be scheduled for the weekend shift." The once bustling calf grew heavy and still.
A customer paused mid-sip.
A new waitress at the back, holding a tray of dishes, looked like she was about to cry. Michael didn't raise his voice. He simply turned to Nina and gave a small nod. "Thank you for not giving up." Then he turned back to face Sandra. This time his gaze turned colder. "Sandra, you didn't just violate company policy, you've stained the very values Sunrise was built upon." No shouting. No finger pointing. Just camera's evidence and a CEO1 attentive enough to never ignore whispers from behind the counter.
Sandra now stood pale.
The regional supervisor gently placed a folder on the counter. "You are hereby suspended, effective immediately. Executive leadership will review your abuse of power and policy violations." An elderly regular, the one who usually sat near the window each morning, slowly nodded and said aloud, "This should have happened a long time ago." The whole calf exhaled, not in applause, but in relief. Nina stood still, eyes wet, but for the first time she didn't lower her head. Michael Foster stood at the center of the calf.
Sunlight from the window framed his shoulder.
He wasn't angry. He wasn't theatrical. Just calm words spoken like a promise. "From today on at this Sunrise Calf, no one will be judged by the curve of their smile. We hire people, not smiles. And we absolutely will not track shifts based on emotional metrics invented by one manager." The room was silent. Nina, still standing by the pastry case, lifted her head. For the first time all morning, she didn't force a smile. Michael reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. He handed it to her with both hands, voice steady yet warm. "This is your official contract. A fixed schedule, not subject to arbitrary changes. And if you need it, Sunrise will cover 3 months of mental health support. No conditions." Nina opened the envelope. Her hands trembled slightly. Inside the white sheet was her new contract, along with a letter signed in blue ink. Written by Michael himself. The last line read, "Clearly because your smile should be yours, not borrowed, not forced." Nina broke down in tears. But this time it wasn't from exhaustion. Not from pressure. Not from whispered threats in the kitchen. It was because finally someone had seen her. Not through a uniform. Not through the brightness of her smile, but truly saw her as a human being with emotions, limits, and dignity. Another staff member stepped forward. It was the young barista, the one who had once been forced to collect every cash tip handed out individually. He pulled a few crumpled bills from his pocket, placed them on the counter. These probably should have been Nina's. "I'm sorry for staying silent." Michael said nothing. He just nodded, eyes filled with understanding. Right then and there, the regional supervisor opened the tablet, enabled the LIVATIPTRACKING features sorted by table by server updating in real time. A screen was installed behind the counter, immediately displaying tip sharing real-time, verified, transparent. The light from the screen reflected on the faces of the staff no longer lowered. A line cook took out his phone, opened the time tracking app. For the first time, his shift appeared exactly as scheduled. A trainee, quietly wiping down tables, whispered, "Feels like this might really be happening." Michael returned to his old table. He sat down, picked up his now cold coffee. Not to drink, but to sit with it, to witness this moment when this calf, once filled with pressure and silent tears, returned to its true form, a warm place. A place where people could be themselves. That morning, Michael Foster left Sunrise Calf when the sun was already high. He didn't look back, but in the eyes of the staff, watching from inside, his silhouette was no longer that of a stranger. It was the first person who walked in, listened, and believed in what they had never dared to say out loud. Next to the counter on the notice board, a new sign had been posted: simple, no frills, a smile should never be a requirement. Just a reflection of how we're treated. Beneath the quote was the signature of Michael Foster, blue ink, handwritten. A real smile doesn't come from fear. A good workplace shouldn't force anyone to feel joy. "I didn't create Sunrise to train people how to smile," Michael once wrote in his small notebook on the last page. "I built Sunrise so people could serve with peace of mind, live with honest emotion, and know that just by being here, they already matter." Why are people forced to smile? Because the system measured expression, not performance. Is it true they lost pay if they weren't cheerful? Yes. And the evidence appeared on camera in front of the whole calf. Stay till the end. He doesn't just hear the truth, he rewrites the rules. The viewers watched as layers of truth were peeled back. From whispers behind the counter to a clip of camera footage. From Nina's fearful eyes to the moment she cried because she no longer had to fake a smile. The silenced were finally given a voice. The oppressor exposed in front of all. The old system was replaced right in the middle of the video. Michael didn't just show up. He stayed to act, to make it right, to ensure no one ever had to live like a puppet programmed to smile. Nina stood behind the counter, her hand gently resting on the rim of a cappuccino cup. A customer walked in and smiled at her. And this time she smiled back, not because she had to, not because of the system, not because of pressure, but because she finally felt safe. A genuine smile is a silent thank you from an employee to the place that made them feel respected.